What's up guys? Today we've got another amplifier to check out. This is the brand new Starke Fiera 8. So shout out to the guys at Starke for sending this over for me to review. Thank you guys. Let's get this thing unboxed. So inside here we get the user guide, which is the Fiera 8. This also comes in Fiera 4, which is the 4-channel version. Here's the warranty card and the power cable. And there is a 3-year warranty on this. So this comes nicely packaged. Let's take a quick look around front. So this comes with aluminum face plate. There's a little LED indicator right in the front there. There's also the main power button. Nothing else on the front, but up top we have the Fiera branding on the top here. Nothing on the sides. So around back we have your balance ins and outs for all 8 channels. There is a little unbalanced balance switch. They have binding posts for all 8 channels, as well as trigger ins and outs, your main on-off switch, and then your power inlet. Like I said, this is an 8-channel amplifier. It's rated at 130 watts per channel, all 8 channels driven into 8 ohms, or 260 watts per channel, all channels driven into 4 ohms. This does use Starke's proprietary custom designed Class D module, which I believe is based on the TI chipset, so it should run pretty cool. And since it is Class D, it should have pretty low noise as well. So if it sounds anything like the Class D 8-channel amplifier that I did from Trinov earlier, it should sound pretty quiet. The input gain on this is rated at 21.5 dB, and I know the Trinov was rated at 19 dB, and my McIntosh was at 29 dB. So I think that's why I was getting a little bit hiss out of the McIntosh, whereas the Trinov was a lot quieter. So I'm expecting this one, of course, to fall in between those two. Maybe not as quiet as the Trinov, but it should be quieter than McIntosh. Now this is a fairly compact unit. It's your standard 17.7 inches wide. It is 5.5 inches from top to bottom in height, and it is 13.5 inches in depth. And it does weigh 21.5 pounds, so it's pretty small, pretty dense. It does feel like a quality feeling product. So let's go ahead. I'm gonna get this thing set up in the home theater, and I'll come back, give you some thoughts and impressions. Now, if you've never connected an amplifier to your AVR or processor before, it's pretty simple. You're gonna have to take your RCA cable, find the pre-out that you wanna feed into the amplifier. So we're gonna take our front left speaker, which is that guy right there. We're gonna take our RCA cable, plug it right into the pre-out, front left. We're gonna take the other end of the RCA cable, and we're gonna plug it right into the input 1 on the amplifier. Now input 1 could be anything. You can plug the pre-out into any one of these channels, just as long as you know which output goes into which input on the amplifier. And to make it easier to remember, it's always nice to have labels for all of your channels. You also want to make sure that this switch is switched over to unbalanced for RCA. If you are using XLR cables, you want to make sure it's switched over to balanced for XLRs. And once you get that connected up with your unbalanced RCA cables, you're going to take your speaker cables, plug them right into output number 1, which is our front left channel, and that's it, and you're all done. Now, if you couldn't tell, I'm using the brand new Marantz Cinema 50 AVR in preamp mode to test out the Starke Sound amplifier. I'm also going to compare the Starke Sound with the built-in amps in the Marantz AVR. I have also connected both the Marantz and the Starke Sound in my home theater, which consists of 11 Bowers & Wilkins CT 7.4 speakers. Both amp and AVR also was hooked up in my 2-channel setup, which consists of a pair of Canta Bookshelf number 1 speakers. I didn't use any subwoofers in any of these testings, just so I can see how capable the amplifiers are in the amplifier and in the Marantz. Now, first thing I want to talk about real quick is what I had said earlier about the hiss coming from the McIntosh amp and the Trinov amplifier. The Trinov is still the most quietest amp that I think I've ever heard. The McIntosh being probably the second place as far as noise floor and hiss. It's very faint, but it's noticeable if you put your ear up to it. And I would say that the Starke Sound, which I thought was going to fall between the two, is actually a little bit louder than the McIntosh. It's not something that you're going to notice if you're just sitting down listening to music, but just know that there is a slight hiss if you were to put your ear up to the tweeter. But in comparison to the Marantz had the same amount of hiss, but there's also a very, very slight buzz coming from the Marantz. All right, with that being said, first thing let's talk about is the bass between the amp and the Marantz. I felt the Starke had a slightly more punchier bass over the Marantz, whereas the Marantz, just a little bit lighter. Not like a big difference, but I did notice it on certain movies where maybe it might be gun heavy, such as John Wick. I did play the demo that I love checking out on Midway, which is that beginning aerial fight with the planes that are flying, you know, from back to front, front to back. If you put the Marantz into full range, running all your speakers without a subwoofer, just running all your speakers as large, those planes definitely have a bit more weight coming from them using the Starke, whereas it is a little bit lighter with the Marantz. Not by much, but just a tad. It's easier to hear with music, so with the amount of pop music, rap music that I played, Post Malone, The Weeknd, I did play some Drake. It definitely slams just a little bit harder on the Starke sound. I did find the mid-range kind of negligible again between the two. They almost sounded identical. I would have to say the Marantz maybe had a slightly more forward mid-range presence to it, so vocalists, singers came out a little bit more in front of the soundstage, whereas on the Starke sound, it was a little bit more recessed behind my speakers. So I'd say that soundstage maybe reached about a foot or so behind my speakers with the Starke. The Marantz, the singers and the instruments seemed to kind of like just float right in front of the speakers. So a deeper, more three-dimensional soundstage with the Starke, just a little bit, again, just a little bit. So a slightly more three-dimensional soundstage with the Starke sound and a more forward presence with the Marantz. One thing I did notice right away was the separation and isolation amongst the singer and the instruments in the soundstage. There's this part in this song off the Dominique Fils-Aimé album, the song's called Home, where you can hear, I believe there's a drummer in the background that's kind of like beating on the drums in the back, and you can hear the drums kind of going from the right speaker over to the left speaker, and you can hear that very clearly on the Starke sound. Whereas on the Marantz, it kind of sounded like it was meshing with the vocals, so it was a little bit more smeared sounding. Whereas on the Starke, it definitely had cleaner separation amongst the different layers. So that's one thing I thought was pretty noticeable for me. Again, I'm not saying that the Marantz sounded bad or anything. It's just like the Starke just had a little bit more clarity to it, and I would attribute that and also the deeper soundstage with the high frequency extension on the Starke. There was a little bit more extension on the top end, so hi-hats and cymbals had a bit more sparkle. And on the Marantz, it's got a warmer sound, so it's like those cymbal hits, those hi-hat hits, the little sizzle, the little pss, 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 kind of decayed a bit quicker, whereas it just kept on going just a little bit more on the Starke sound. I would say that the Marantz almost had a very slight veil over it. And I guess the question would be, how does these slight differences, at least for stereo, two-channel listening, translate to home theater? Is there more bass? Is there more treble? Can you really hear that much difference having all these speakers playing at the same time? These small differences are negligible. I would say on like certain movies like A Quiet Place, where it relies a lot on ambiance, I did like the extra high frequency detail on the Starke, so it seemed a little bit more airier sounding. Of course, the Marantz, you do have Odyssey, so if you wanted to bump that up a little bit more, bump the treble up a little bit more, you could do that for sure. But just out of the box with no room correction, the Starke sound just gave me a little bit more air at the top end. And as far as bass response in your home theater, I don't think many people are going to be running their speakers full range or anything below 80 hertz. I don't think they're going to be running them full range, at least not most people. So that's kind of a moot point because you're going to be using a subwoofer anyways. I just think if you're going to sit down and listen to two-channel, then that's where the biggest differences are going to be between the two. And they're not even big differences, they're pretty minute. At the time of this video, the Fiera 8 is selling for $17.99, although it might be on sale by the time you watch this video. Now, if you're wondering why I compared this to a Marantz receiver, I felt that if you had an AVR that was feeling a bit underpowered or it wasn't as dynamic as you'd want it to be, you can always add an external amplifier to juice things up a bit. provided you have the pre-outs on your AVR. As I said earlier, the Marantz is a fantastic receiver, and I don't think you'd necessarily need an amplifier for it, but the Starke is a nice option to have if you want to squeeze a little more performance out of your receiver or processor without having to spend too much spare change. The treble extension was a touch more extended, and the mid-bass impact felt more present as well with the Fiera 8. Now, the great thing about having an external amplifier is that you won't be replacing it as often as you would a receiver or preamp, so it can remain in your system as audio formats change in the home theater space. It's a wonderful amplifier that sounds great for home theater and just as good for 2-channel listening. Now, if you do want a more technical deep dive into how the Starke measures, Audioholics has a pretty extensive written review on the smaller Fiera 4, which is supposed to be the same as the Fiera 8. Well, anyways guys, thanks for checking out this video. If you'd like to pick up this amp or any Starke products, I'll leave some links down below for them in the video's description. As always guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to like this video if you found it useful and subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you again in the next video.